Hello, old friends, and you weary souls searching for quiet. Welcome back. Tonight, we won't be descending into the damp tunnels of sanitation history. No, tonight, we'll do something even stranger. We'll go searching for joy. In an age when joy was a rare commodity, sometimes rough around the edges, and often very, very loud. Forget the glowing screens for a moment. Set aside the blockbuster movies and the endless streams of breaking news. Imagine instead a world illuminated only by candlelight and campfires. A world where entertainment wasn't something you consumed, but something you created. Or in many cases, something you simply survived. Picture cobblestone streets slick with autumn rain, where the scent of wood smoke mingles with something less pleasant, where laughter echoes from tavern doorways and the distant sound of drums draws crowds toward the village square. This was a time when boredom wasn't solved with a swipe of your thumb, but with your whole body, your voice, and sometimes your willingness to get very, very muddy. So, let your shoulders drop just a little lower. Feel the weight of the day beginning to settle. Tonight, we'll wander together through these forgotten festivals, past the flickering torchlight, and into a world where entertainment was earned with scraped knees and hoarse voices. So find yourself a position that feels just right. Pull that blanket up a little higher. Feel the gentle weight of your body as it begins to sink deeper into comfort. Let the worries of our modern world dissolve away like smoke rising from that distant campfire we can almost see flickering in the darkness. Take a slow, deep breath and let it out even more slowly. Feel the cool night air as it seems to drift into your room. Tonight, we'll walk together through bustling market squares and crowded taverns across empty fields where people found laughter in the simplest things. We'll listen to the echo of wooden wheels on cobblestone, the soft rustle of rough wool clothing, the distant melody of a lute drifting from an open window. Close your eyes and hear the gentle murmur of voices speaking languages that sound almost familiar. Smell the wood smoke mixing with fresh bread and something earthier, the scent of a world where everything was touched by human hands. Feel the cool stone of ancient walls worn smooth by countless fingers. This was entertainment before electricity, before amplification, before anything but the human voice and the flicker of flame. And if you find yourself enjoying this journey through time, a gentle tap of like would be like sending a quiet greeting across the centuries. Tell me in the comments if you could step into a time machine, which festival from the past would you most want to attend? But for now, let your eyelids grow heavy. The festivities are about to begin. You might hear the distant sound of drums, or perhaps the gentle lowing of cattle being led to market. Maybe the soft splash of oars in a river, or the creak of wooden cart wheels finding their rhythm on an ancient road. These are the sounds that carried people toward their celebrations, their brief escapes from the endless cycle of work and worry. In just a moment, we'll step through the mists of time, back to when a single day of celebration could sustain a community through months of hardship, when the promise of a festival was enough to make even the darkest winter nights feel shorter, when joy wasn't streamed or downloaded but earned with your whole being. Let that thought settle over you like a warm woolen cloak. Feel yourself becoming lighter, ready to drift back through the centuries to a time when celebration meant something different entirely. The campfire is waiting. The stories are about to unfold, and you're perfectly positioned to hear them all. Medieval joy wasn't always beautiful. It often came with mud, with crude jokes, and with an acceptance that sometimes the funniest thing of all was someone else's misfortune. But it was also real. It was the unguarded laughter of a community coming together to forget a day of back-breaking labor. Let's begin where most public merriment took place. At the festivals. Imagine if you were waking up on a morning when the church bells ring differently. Not the solemn toll of daily prayers, but something more playful, more chaotic. The air itself seems charged with possibility. Today is not like other days. Today, the normal rules don't apply. Today is festival day. You can hear it before you see it, the distant rumble of many voices like a approaching storm, made of laughter and shouting. The clip-clop of horses' hooves on stone grows faster, more urgent. Cartwheels creak under the weight of mysterious bundles covered in rough canvas. Children's voices rise above it all, high and excited like birds who've discovered something wonderful. The scent carries on the morning breeze. Wood smoke, yes, but also roasting meat, spilled ale, and that particular smell of many people gathered together in excitement. It's the smell of anticipation itself, mixed with yesterday's straw and today's possibilities. As you make your way toward the village square, your feet know the path by heart. But today, even familiar stones feel different under your shoes. The very air seems to vibrate with the promise of something extraordinary. This is the morning when ordinary people become something else entirely, when the careful boundaries of daily life dissolve like mist in sunlight. And there just ahead, you can see the first banners snapping in the wind, hear the first burst of unrestrained laughter. The festival has begun. Imagine just for one day each year, every rule turned upside down. A day when the poor dressed like bishops and the lowest ranking clergy were elected as the Lord of Misrule. Welcome to the Feast of Fools. Picture yourself standing at the heavy wooden doors of a great cathedral. But this isn't the solemn sanctuary you might expect. Instead, there's a peculiar energy in the air, the scent of incense mixed with something far less holy. The sound of laughter echoes off stone pillars that have witnessed centuries of whispered prayers. Today, those same stones hear something entirely different. Step inside, and your eyes need a moment to adjust. The familiar space has been transformed. Where you'd normally see rows of quietly kneeling figures, there's movement, noise, celebration. The air is thick, not just with the usual frankincense, but with the acrid smoke of burning leather, old shoes, and worn-out boots thrown onto the altar fires in a deliberate mockery of sacred ritual. At the center of it all stands this year's Lord of Misrule, perhaps a young monk, barely 20, who spent most of the year copying manuscripts in silent obedience. But today, he wears his vestments backwards, a ridiculous hat perched askew on his head. His voice, usually reserved for quiet Latin prayers, now booms through the cathedral in a theatrical parody of the Mass, every word deliberately wrong, every gesture exaggerated. The congregation responds not with amen, but with braying sounds, hee-haw, hee-haw. And speaking of braying, listen carefully. Yes, that's the sound of an actual donkey being led down the center aisle. The Feast of Fools didn't just mock the liturgy in words, they brought farm animals into God's house to join the choir. The donkey's plaintive call mixes with human laughter in a symphony that would have horrified the church fathers. And yet here it was, sanctioned chaos in the holiest of spaces. Watch as dice clatter across the altar where the Eucharist is normally celebrated. Coins flash in the candlelight as impromptu gambling takes place in the shadow of ancient crosses. Someone has brought out a deck of playing cards, those relatively new inventions from the East, and they're being shuffled with the irreverent enthusiasm of people who know this freedom won't last long. The smoke from those burning shoes creates a haze that makes everything seem dreamlike. Your eyes water slightly, but you can't look away. There's something mesmerizing about watching the most rigid social order of medieval life completely dissolve, even if only for these few precious hours. A group of younger clergy members has started an impromptu dance, their usually serious faces flushed with wine and liberation. Their feet, accustomed to measured processions, now stamp out rhythms that have nothing to do with Gregorian chant. The sound echoes off the vaulted ceiling, mixing with the continued off-key bells that ring out the festival's strange liturgy. But notice how even in this chaos, there's an underlying structure. This isn't random destruction. It's carefully orchestrated rebellion. Every mockery has its purpose. Every reversed ritual, its meaning. The peasant playing bishop for a day isn't trying to tear down the church. He's releasing the pressure that builds up from a year of bowing and scraping. The young monk leading the service isn't committing sacrilege. He's participating in a safety valve that keeps the entire system from exploding. As you stand in this transformed sacred space, breathing in the strange mixture of holy incense and profane smoke, you begin to understand something profound about medieval life. This wasn't irreverence for its own sake. This was survival. In a world where every day brought reminders of hierarchy and powerlessness one day, of controlled chaos wasn't just permitted, it was necessary. The afternoon light filtering through stained glass windows casts colored shadows on faces bright with laughter and mischief. Children dart between the adults, their usual restraint forgotten. Even the elderly participate, their lined faces creased with smiles as they watch their grandchildren experience their first taste of sanctioned rebellion. And then, as evening approaches, you can sense the subtle shift. The laughter gradually softens. The dice are gathered up. The donkey is led somewhat reluctantly back outside. The backwards vestments are carefully removed and folded. Tomorrow order will return. The hierarchy will reassert itself. But tonight, as the last echoes of unconventional celebration fade from these ancient stones, there's a deep satisfaction in the air. The church will need thorough cleaning, of course. The smell of burned leather will linger for days. But something else lingers too. The memory of a moment when the impossible became possible, when the last became first, and when even the house of God could echo with the sound of donkeys and dice and thoroughly human laughter. As you finally step back out into the evening air, your ears still ringing with the memory of those discordant bells you carry with you, the knowledge that sometimes the most sacred thing of all is the freedom to be foolish, even if only for one day a year. Beyond the church walls, across the muddy fields, joy took on a different form, a form that often ended with bruises and a great deal of mud. Follow the sound of voices growing louder, more urgent. Your feet squelch slightly in the soft earth as you make your way toward the commotion. The morning frost has melted into the kind of mud that seems to grab at your shoes with every step. But ahead, there's something that makes even the discomfort worthwhile: the sight of an entire community gathered for what they call football, though it bears little resemblance to any sport you might recognize. This isn't a match between 11 players on each side. This is warfare disguised as entertainment, a battle between entire villages. Picture it, perhaps 60 men from your village facing off against 60 from the neighboring settlement. The ball, a pig's bladder, inflated and sewn into a rough sphere, slippery with morning dew, and soon to be slick with something far less pleasant. The rules are beautifully simple in their absence. There are virtually none. The objective: get that bladder ball to your village church, by any means necessary. Watch as the mass of humanity begins to move like a living, breathing creature with 100 arms and twice as many legs. Men grab at clothing at arms at anything that might slow their opponent's progress. Listen to the symphony of it all, the slap of bare feet and leather boots on wet grass, the grunt of exertion as someone goes down in a tangle of limbs, the splash as the entire scrum tumbles into a shallow stream. The pig's bladder ball disappears for minutes at a time, buried somewhere in the writhing mass of bodies, only to suddenly pop free and go bouncing across a field, followed by the thunderous pursuit of men who've forgotten entirely about dignity. This isn't a game that lasts an hour. This is an all-day affair that can stretch across miles of countryside. Follow the action as it flows like a river through villages, over stone walls, through forests where low branches catch at hair and clothing. The ball, when you can see it, might travel 3 miles before anyone gets close to a goal. But step closer to where the wrestling contests are taking place, away from the chaos of the football melee. Here, the competition is more intimate but no less fierce. There's no padded mat, no referee in a striped shirt, just a circle of spectators standing on grass that's been trampled into mud, cheering for their chosen champion. Watch these two men as they circle each other, their hands reaching for purchase on rough woolen tunics already damp with sweat. There's an art to this even in its simplicity. Each wrestler seeks to grab his opponent's clothing, a sleeve, a belt, the front of a tunic, and use leverage to send him tumbling to the ground. The first man, whose back touches the earth, loses, but the prize makes it worthwhile. Perhaps a young sheep, or a particularly fine rooster, or simply the right to boast in the tavern for months to come. The sound when someone hits the ground is substantial, a wet thud that you feel as much as hear. But notice how quickly both men are back on their feet, clasping hands, grinning despite the mud caked in their hair. This is combat without malice, strength tested in the spirit of celebration rather than conquest. Now, turn your attention to the hammer throwing contest, where the blacksmiths and strongest farmers gather to test their raw power. The hammer is really a heavy stone or metal weight attached to a wooden handle, worn smooth by countless hands. Watch as a burly man, his arms thick from years of swinging real hammers at his forge, takes his position. He spins slowly. At first, then faster, the weight beginning to sing through the air. His feet dig into the soft earth for purchase. His face reddens with the effort. And then, with a grunt that echoes across the field, he releases the hammer. It arcs through the air, tumbling end over end, before embedding itself in the ground with a satisfying thunk that you can feel through the soles of your feet. The crowd measures the distance with paces, arguing good-naturedly about whether this throw beat the previous record. Children dart in to retrieve the hammer, struggling with its weight, while the thrower accepts congratulations and perhaps a drink from someone's leather flask. These games, violent though they may appear, serve a purpose deeper than mere entertainment. Watch the face of the village blacksmith as he loses gracefully to a farmer's son in the wrestling match. See how disputes from earlier in the year, whose pig got into whose garden, who owes whom for borrowed tools, are settled not with words or law courts, but with a friendly test of strength. As the day wears on and the various contests wind down, notice how the competitors gather together, sharing ale from the same jug, comparing bruises with the casual pride of warriors after battle. The village rivalries that drove the football match have dissolved into friendly conversation about technique and luck. The wrestler who won the sheep shares his prize at an impromptu feast. This is community building disguised as violent social bonding wrapped in competition. By the time the sun sets and the last hammer has been thrown, the small resentments and tensions that build up in any close-knit community have been literally wrestled away, kicked across fields, and hurled into the distance with a satisfying thud. Tomorrow, these same men will go back to their forges and farms, their usual quiet routines. But tonight, they'll sit by their fires, rubbing their bruises and reliving their moments of glory, bound together by mud and sweat and the memory of a pig's bladder sailing through the autumn air. The entertainments of the past sometimes became the horrors of the present, and nowhere is this more evident than in how they treated creatures that couldn't speak for themselves. Let your mind drift to a different corner of the festival grounds where a different kind of crowd has gathered. The air here carries a different energy, sharper, more urgent. Listen to the voices, and you'll notice they're not quite the same as the laughter around the wrestling matches. There's something more primal here, something that reaches back to humanity's ancient relationship with the wild. Picture a temporary arena, really just a circular space marked out with rope and wooden posts. At the center, a thick wooden stake driven deep into the earth and chained to that stake. Imagine a brown bear once the king of some distant forest, now reduced to this. The chain is just long enough to allow movement, just short enough to ensure there's no escape from what's coming. The bear's breath creates a maw, small clouds in the cool air. Its dark eyes watch the growing crowd with an intelligence that's both heartbreaking and unsettling. This isn't a wild creature anymore, but it's not quite tame either. It exists in that terrible space between worlds neither free nor truly domesticated. Now listen carefully, the sound of dogs approaching. Not the friendly farm dogs you might see chasing children around the village, but hunting hounds bred for strength and aggression. Their barks have a different quality, sharper and more focused. They know what's expected of them. What follows was considered by medieval society to be a noble sport. Bear baiting drew crowds that included not just farmers and merchants, but nobility. Queens and princesses would attend these spectacles their fine silk gowns a stark contrast to the raw violence unfolding before them. It was seen as a display of courage, not just the bears, but the dogs' willingness to face a creature many times their size. The sound of it fills the air, the deep rumbling growl of the bear mixed with the sharp barking of the dogs. But notice something about the crowd. Their cheers aren't quite the same as during the football match. There's an edge here, a tension that speaks to something deeper in human nature. This isn't community building through shared struggle. This is something else entirely. Step away from the bear, baiting toward a quieter but no less intense competition. Here in a smaller circle, two roosters face each other with the focused intensity of professional warriors. Cockfighting requires less space, but no less passion from its spectators. Watch the handlers as they prepare their birds. These aren't random farm roosters, but creatures bred and trained for this moment. Their feathers gleam in the afternoon light, their movements sharp and deliberate. Each bird represents not just its owner's pride, but often a significant portion of his wealth. Coins change hands as quickly as words, bets placed on bloodline, on past performance, on nothing more than a feeling. The fight itself is quick, almost anticlimactic after all the preparation. A flurry of wings and spurs, a few moments of intense struggle, and then it's over. One bird struts victorious, while the other, well, the crowd moves on to the next match, the next wager, the next opportunity to test their luck against fate. But for a moment of relief from these more serious contests, turn your attention to something that brings out genuine laughter from the crowd, the greased pig chase. Here's an entertainment that's more comedy than cruelty. A young pig, barely larger than a small dog, has been thoroughly coated with pig fat until it's as slippery as a river stone. Watch as it's released into a small enclosure with a dozen volunteers. The objective seems simple enough. Catch the pig, keep the pig. But observe what actually happens. Grown men confident in their strength and coordination find themselves slipping and sliding across the muddy ground like children on winter ice. The pig, seemingly enjoying the game, darts between legs and through grasping hands with an agility that borders on the supernatural. The laughter here is different, warmer, more inclusive. When someone takes a particularly spectacular tumble, the crowd's response is sympathetic rather than bloodthirsty. This is entertainment that everyone can enjoy, regardless of their taste for more violent spectacles. A farmer reaches for the pig and ends up flat on his back, covered in mud and pig grease, grinning despite his failure. His neighbors help him to his feet while the pig continues its evasive dance. There's something almost innocent about this contest between human determination and porcine cunning. Eventually, someone does manage to corner and catch the slippery prize, usually through luck, as much as skill. The pig, seeming to accept its fate with good grace, is carried off by its new owner, while the unsuccessful contestants scrape mud from their clothes and plan their strategy for next year's attempt. As you stand watching these various contests, breathing in the mixture of animal scents, human sweat, and autumn air, it's difficult not to judge what you're seeing by modern standards. But perhaps in a world where survival and death walked hand in hand, every day the line between necessity and entertainment was naturally blurred. For people who slaughtered their own meat and faced the constant threat of wild animals, these spectacles might have seemed as natural as breathing. The contests continue as the sun moves across the sky, each one a small drama of strength, cunning, or simple luck. And when evening finally arrives and the crowds begin to disperse, the memory of what they've witnessed will fuel conversations in taverns and around firesides for weeks to come. Tomorrow, the bear will be led away to the next village, the roosters will return to their coops, and the greased pig will settle into its new home. But tonight, the echoes of cheers and groans of victory and defeat will linger in the cooling air like incense from a very different kind of ritual. But not all joy came from mud and violence. Sometimes entertainment arrived on foot, carrying nothing but stories and songs and the promise of somewhere else entirely. Picture the moment when strangers approach your village, not merchants with their heavy carts of goods, not soldiers with their clanking armor, but something far more precious. Travelers who carry their entire livelihood in a small bundle slung over their shoulders, whose wealth lies not in coins, but in melodies, remembered stories preserved, and skills that can transform any patch of ground into a stage. Watch as word spreads through the village faster than wildfire. Minstrels have come. The phrase passes from house to house, bringing people to their doorways, drawing children from their chores, and adults from their endless labor. There's something magical about the arrival of traveling performers. They bring news from distant places. Yes, but more importantly, they bring the promise of transformation. Follow the growing crowd toward the village square, where a small group has already begun to set up their impromptu theater. At the center stands a minstrel, his lute cradled against his chest like a beloved child. The instrument itself tells a story worn smooth by countless fingers, its wood darkened by years of handling tiny scratches and dents that speak of 1,000 performances in 1,000 different places. Listen as he begins to tune the strings, each note hanging in the air for a moment before being joined by the next. The sound seems to cast a spell over the gathering crowd. Conversations quiet. Children stop their restless movement. Even the dogs seem to settle, as if they too understand that something special is about to begin. Now he starts to sing, and you understand immediately why people have left their work to hear this. His voice isn't perfect. It's been weathered by years of performing in taverns, filled with smoke, in castle halls, where the acoustics swallow sound, in open fields, where wind carries words away. But it's real, in a way that cuts straight to the heart. The song he chooses tells the story of a knight and a dragon, but not in the way you might expect. This is no simple tale of good versus evil. Instead, it's a complex narrative about loneliness and understanding, about the price of heroism and the weight of expectations. His voice rises and falls, with the melody sometimes barely above a whisper, sometimes swelling to fill the square entirely. Around him, you notice other performers preparing their own displays. A juggler sits cross-legged on the ground, arranging his tools with the precision of a craftsman. Not balls or pins, but real knives, sharp enough to shave, with heavy enough to do serious damage if his concentration fails. He handles them with the casual confidence of someone for whom danger has become routine. Watch as he rises smoothly to his feet and begins his performance. The knives flash in the afternoon sunlight as they arc through the air in perfect hypnotic patterns. One, then two, then three blades spinning in a deadly dance that seems to defy both gravity and common sense. The crowd's breathing seems to synchronize with the rhythm of the juggling, everyone inhaling together each time the knives reach their peak, and exhaling as they fall safely back into his waiting hands. Nearby, an acrobat has found a length of rope stretched between two sturdy posts. She moves along it with the fluid grace of someone born to defy the earth's pull. Her bare feet find purchase on the narrow cord as if it were solid ground, her arms extending for balance in movements that look more like dance than desperate equilibrium. But perhaps most captivating of all is the storyteller who has gathered the children and many of the adults into a tight circle. He has no instruments, no props, no spectacular physical skills, just his voice and the ability to weave words into worlds. Watch the faces of his audience as he spins his tail eyes wide with wonder, mouths slightly open, completely transported from this muddy village square to wherever his imagination chooses to take them. His story tonight is about a clever farmer who outwits a greedy lord, and you can see the adults exchanging meaningful glances as certain details hit close to home. But he's careful, this storyteller. His tale is just fictional enough to be safe, just realistic enough to be satisfying. He knows the power of stories to comfort the powerless and the danger they pose to those who challenge authority too directly. As the afternoon wears on, a small monkey appears dressed in a tiny vest and cap, It moves through the crowd with a wooden cup, collecting whatever coins people can spare. The sight of this little creature, so obviously trained, yet so charmingly natural in its begging, brings laughter and loosens purse strings in equal measure. Notice how the performers work together without seeming to coordinate. When the juggler's act reaches its climax, the minstrel's song naturally fades. When the storyteller pauses for dramatic effect, the acrobat chooses that moment for her most spectacular feat. They've performed together long enough to read each other's rhythms to create a seamless flow of entertainment that feels organic rather than rehearsed. As evening begins to settle over the village, you can sense the performance drawing to a close. The minstrel's final song is gentler than his first, designed to ease the transition from the magical world of performance back to the everyday reality of medieval life. The juggler's knives disappear back into their leather wrappings. The acrobat touches solid ground once more, but the magic doesn't end with the performance. As the crowd begins to disperse, you can hear fragments of the stories being retold, melodies being hummed, children attempting to recreate the acrobatic feats they've just witnessed. The performers have done more than entertain, they've planted seeds of wonder that will continue to grow long after they've moved on to the next village. Tomorrow morning, these traveling performers will shoulder their packs and take to the road again. They'll carry tonight's stories with them to other villages, other audiences, hungry for a glimpse of something beyond their daily routines. They are the fireflies of the medieval world, carrying light and warmth from place to place, leaving behind only memories and the echo of laughter in the gathering dusk. When the rain falls, or when the day's work in the fields is finally done, there's one place everyone seeks out. Not the church, but the tavern. A warm refuge, noisy and alive, always carrying the scent of ale smoke and questionable decisions. Step through the heavy wooden door, ducking slightly to avoid the low frame, and let your eyes adjust to the dim interior. This isn't a bright, airy space. The ceiling hangs low overhead, darkened by years of smoke from the central hearth and countless tallow candles. The air is thick enough to feel against your skin, a mixture of wood smoke, brewing ale, unwashed bodies, and something earthier that speaks to the realities of medieval hygiene. Your feet find purchase on a floor covered with fresh straw, scattered to absorb the inevitable spills and other things that might find their way to the ground in an establishment where ale flows freely and chamber pots are a luxury. The straw rustles softly with each step, already beginning to darken with moisture from boots and worse. Find yourself a spot on one of the long wooden benches that line the rough-hewn tables. The wood is worn smooth by countless elbows and has been carved with initials, crude drawings, and symbols whose meanings have been lost to time. Run your fingers along the surface and feel the stories embedded in the grain, years of conversations, arguments, celebrations, and sorrows, all absorbed into the timber like memories, Watch the tavern keeper as he moves between the tables, a barrel-chested man whose leather apron bears the stains of his trade. In his hands, wooden tankards filled with ale that looks nothing like the clear golden brew you might expect. This is a thick, dark liquid that's more like liquid bread than anything else cloudy with sediment substantial enough to serve as nourishment rather than simple refreshment. This ale is safety in a world where water might kill you. Everyone drinks it. Men, women, children. All have their daily ration of a weaker version. It's the fuel of daily life. And tonight, in this warm sanctuary, away from the cold evening air, it flows more freely than usual. The sound of it being poured creates its own rhythm. The gurgle from the barrel, the soft thunk as full tankards are set on wooden tables. Listen to the conversations flowing around you like currents in a river. At the table nearest the fire, a group of farmers discusses the weather with the intensity of scholars debating theology. Rain-patterned soil conditions the behavior of livestock. These aren't casual observations, but life and death intelligence that will determine whether families eat well or go hungry in the coming months. But as the ale continues to flow and tongues loosen, the conversations grow more animated, more personal. A merchant from 2 villages over shares news about a new tax the Lord has imposed. A woman whispers urgently about her neighbor's daughter who disappeared 3 nights ago, only to return with a secret smile and no explanation. This is the medieval internet information traveling from person to person, growing and changing with each retelling. From somewhere across the room, a voice rises in song, not a carefully composed ballad like the minstrel performed in the square, but something earthier, more immediate. It's a work song, something to keep rhythm while threshing grain or hauling stone. But here in the tavern, it becomes something else entirely. Other voices join in, some confident, others wavering with ale and uncertainty. The song speaks of things that couldn't be said in daylight, subtle criticism of the local lord's latest decree, gentle mockery of the priest's expanding waistline jokes that would earn a beating if overheard by the wrong ears. But here, surrounded by neighbors and protected by the understanding that what happens in the tavern stays in the tavern, these small rebellions are not just tolerated, but celebrated. As the evening deepens and the ale takes hold more firmly, the songs grow bawdier. A group of young men launches into a ballad so explicitly crude that it makes the women at nearby tables blush and cover their mouths, though you notice they're listening intently nonetheless. These are songs that will never be sung in church stories, that will never be written down by scholarly monks. But they're as much a part of medieval culture as any illuminated manuscript. Watch the tavern keeper's wife as she moves between the tables collecting empty tankards and dispensing wisdom in equal measure. She's heard every sob story witnessed, every celebration mediated, every argument that's ever taken place within these walls. Her presence maintains an informal order, not through authority, but through the understanding that crossing her means losing access to this essential gathering place. Notice how disputes that might fester in the cold light of day find resolution here. Two men who've been arguing over a property boundary for months finally hash it out over shared ale, their raised voices gradually giving way to grudging laughter. A woman who suspects her neighbor of stealing eggs confronts the accused directly, and by evenings end their sharing stories about their children's latest mischief. The heat from the central fire combines with the warmth of many bodies to create an atmosphere that's almost tropical compared to the chill outside. Faces flush with more than just ale. There's something intoxicating about being part of this community, this temporary family, bound together by shared drinks and shared secrets. As the candles burn lower and the conversation grows softer, more intimate, you understand why people endure cold rain and exhaustion to gather here. This isn't just about drinking ale or escaping work. This is about being human in the company of other humans, about sharing the small joys and large sorrows that make up a life. Eventually, the last songs fade into contented murmurs. People begin to make their way toward the door, stepping carefully over companions who found sleep where they sit. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new work, new worries. But tonight, warmed by ale and community, those troubles seem manageable, distant, as the stars barely visible through the smoky air. In a shadowed corner of the tavern, or perhaps spread across the floor of a humble cottage, entertainment takes on a more competitive edge, and sometimes it might cost you the very shirt on your back. Move closer to where a small circle has formed around two men hunched over what appears to be nothing more than a few small irregular cubes carved from bone. But watch their faces. The intensity there suggests these simple objects hold the power to change lives. Medieval dice weren't the perfect geometric shapes you might imagine. Carved from the knuckle bones of sheep or cattle, each one was slightly different, slightly unpredictable, making every throw a genuine encounter with fate. Listen to the sound as one player shakes the dice in his leather cup, a soft rattling that somehow manages to contain all the hope and desperation in the world. The cup moves in a small circle, the dice tumbling against each other, and the leather walls with a rhythm that's almost hypnotic. Then comes the moment of release, the dice spilling across the rough wooden table with a sound like distant hail. The game they're playing is called Hazard, and it's the grandfather of what would eventually become known as craps. But here in this flickering candlelight, it's not just a game, it's a battle against chance itself. The rules are deceptively simple. Pick a number, roll the dice, hope fortune smiles upon you. Yet, around this simplicity has grown a culture of betting bluffing and desperate mathematics. Watch the farmer across from our original player. His weathered hands hover over a small pile of copper coins, probably his family's entire savings for the week. His eyes never leave the dice calculating odds with the intuitive mathematics of someone who's learned to read the weather judge soil conditions and predict animal behavior. This is just another form of survival, another way of reading the signs that the universe provides. The tension in their small circle is thick enough to cut. When the dice favor the farmer, his relief is visible in the way his shoulders drop, the way his breath escapes in a small puff. When they don't, he places another coin on the table with the grim determination of someone who knows that sometimes you have to risk everything just to stay even. But step away from the intensity of the dice game toward where a very different kind of contest unfolds. Here, two men sit across from each other at a board marked with alternating squares of light and dark wood. Between them, small carved figures stand in careful formation, knights on horseback, towering castles, robed bishops with their pointed mitres clearly visible even in miniature. Chess in medieval times wasn't simply a game. It was a lesson in warfare and society compressed into 64 squares. Every piece had its place, its movement, its purpose, mirroring the rigid hierarchy that governed daily life. The king, powerful but vulnerable. The queen limited in her movement, but deadly when positioned correctly. The pawns expendable foot soldiers who might through patience and cunning become something greater. Watch the concentration on these players' faces. Unlike the dice game, with its quick throws and immediate results, chess demands a different kind of intensity. Each move must be considered not just for its immediate effect, but for how it might influence the game 3, 4, 5 moves in the future. Its strategy made visible planning given physical form. The silence around the chess players is profound, broken only by the soft sound of wooden pieces sliding across the board and the occasional quiet intake of breath when someone realizes they've made an error. Time moves differently here. Minutes can pass between moves as players lean back studying the board as if it contained the secrets of the universe. In another corner, a simpler but no less engaging contest unfolds. 9 men's Morris carved directly into a tabletop provides entertainment for those who want strategy without chess complexity. 3 concentric squares connected by lines create a battlefield where the objective is to trap your opponent's pieces to create mills 3 pieces in a row that allow you to remove enemy forces from the board. The pieces are simple, perhaps just small stones, smooth river pebbles that have been shaped by water into perfect gaming tokens. The sound they make when placed is satisfying, a tiny click that marks each decision. Unlike chess, with its predetermined starting positions, 9 men's Morris begins empty, each player building their position piece by piece, creating opportunities and threats simultaneously. Nearby, another board game captures attention tables, which bears some resemblance to what we might call backgammon. The board is often nothing more than lines scratched into wood or drawn on a piece of leather. But the strategy involved is sophisticated. Players must move their pieces according to dice rolls, but the skill lies in positioning, in creating blockades and safe passages, in knowing when to advance aggressively and when to play defensively. These games serve a different purpose than the muddy contests of the morning, where the outdoor sports built community through shared physical struggle. These indoor challenges sharpen the mind, provide a different kind of release. They're meditation disguised as competition, requiring patience, foresight, and the ability to accept defeat gracefully. As the evening progresses and the tavern grows quieter, the games continue. The dice players have been joined by others, small stakes keeping the tension manageable. The chess match has attracted a small audience of kibitzers who offer silent advice through meaningful glances and barely perceptible shakes of the head. The 9 men's Morris game has become a teaching moment, with an older player showing a younger one the subtleties of positioning. There's something deeply satisfying about this quieter form of entertainment. No one will go home with bruises from these contests, but the satisfaction of a well-played game, the mental exercise of outwitting an opponent, the simple pleasure of handling game pieces worn smooth by countless previous players, these provide their own rewards. Tomorrow, these same men will return to their forges and fields, their familiar routines. But tonight, they've exercised different muscles, tested different skills, found different ways to engage with luck and strategy and the endless human desire to prove oneself worthy of victory. But what of those born to different pleasures? For the noble class, entertainment wasn't just escape from work. It was work itself, a careful performance of power, wealth, and divine right to rule. Step away from the taverns, warmth away from the village squares, muddy contests, and follow a different path entirely. This one leads through carefully maintained gardens, past manicured hedges and flower beds, tended by servants whose names you'll never learn. The very ground beneath your feet speaks of privileged stone paths swept clean, no mud to grab at your shoes, no animal droppings to avoid. Listen carefully, and you can hear it in the distance, the sound that announces the beginning of a noble hunt. Not the simple hunting of a farmer seeking meat for his family table, but something far more elaborate, more theatrical. The hunting horn's call carries across the morning air, rich and full, a sound that speaks of brass crafted by master artisans and lungs trained in the art of musical communication. Follow that sound through the forest paths, and you'll come upon a spectacle that would have seemed impossible to the peasants we left behind in their village. Here, perhaps 30 horses stand ready, their coats gleaming from careful grooming, their saddles and bridles decorated with silver fittings that catch the morning light. Each horse represents more wealth than most families see in a year. Watch the riders as they prepare for the day's hunt. These aren't the rough, practical clothes of farmers or merchants. Instead, you see velvet doublets in rich colors, deep blues and burgundies that speak of dyes imported from distant lands. Their boots are made from leather, so soft and supple it might as well be silk, crafted by artisans who spent years perfecting their trade. But notice the weapons they carry, not the crude spears and clubs of common hunters, but works of art in their own right. Crossbows inlaid with ivory and gold, their mechanisms so precisely crafted they operate with the smoothness of silk. Hunting swords with hilts wrapped in wire, made from precious metals, their blades sharp enough to shave with, but decorated too elaborately to ever be used for anything as mundane as actual work. The quarry they seek isn't the desperate pursuit of survival, but sport elevated to an art form. Watch as the hounds are released, not the mixed breeds that might guard a farmer's cottage, but creatures bred for generations for specific traits. Their baying as they pick up the scent creates a music all its own, a wild harmony that echoes through the trees and sends smaller creatures scattering for cover. Follow the hunt as it moves through the forest, and observe how even this seemingly wild chase follows careful rules and protocols. The Lord must strike the killing blow, not because he's the best hunter, but because tradition demands it. The positioning of riders follows strict hierarchy. Even in pursuit of a fleeing stag, social order must be maintained. The deer, when they finally corner it, dies not from necessity, but from ceremony. The noble who makes the kill will likely never eat its meat that will go to servants and retainers. The true prize is the antlers, the story, the demonstration of prowess that can be recounted in castle halls for months to come. But hunting is only one way the nobility displays its power and wealth. Move forward in time to a different spectacle entirely. The tournament ground where entertainment becomes something approaching warfare. The sound here is altogether different from anything we've heard before. The thunder of armored horses charging toward each other creates a rumble you feel in your chest, a vibration that seems to shake the very earth. Picture the scene: a long straight track with a wooden barrier running down the center. On either side, knights in armor so complete it transforms them into something barely human. Their faces are hidden behind visors decorated with fantastic creatures, lions, eagles, dragons, each design speaking to family heritage and personal ambition. These aren't the quick contests of village wrestling or hammer throwing. A joust can take minutes to set up for seconds of actual contact. Watch as each knight is helped onto his horse by servants whose only job is to ensure every piece of armor sits perfectly, every strap is secure, every weapon properly balanced. The lances they carry are works of engineering as much as weapons, carefully balanced poles of ash wood that must be strong enough to survive impact, but flexible enough not to shatter and send splinters flying into the crowd. The tips are often blunted for safety, but don't mistake this for gentleness. The force of two armored riders meeting at full gallop is enough to lift a man completely from his saddle and send him crashing to the ground with the sound of thunder. Listen to the crowd that gathers to watch these contests. This isn't the rough democracy of village entertainment, where farmer and blacksmith cheer side by side. Here seating follows strict social hierarchy. Ladies in silk gowns and elaborate headdresses occupy the best positions, their favor represented by scarves and tokens tied to their chosen knight's lances. The impact, when it comes, is spectacular. The crash of lance against shield, the grunt of horses straining against sudden resistance, the metallic ring of armor being tested beyond its design limits. Sometimes a rider stays in his saddle, sometimes he doesn't. Either way, the crowd's reaction is more polite applause than wild cheering. Even their entertainment must maintain proper decorum. But perhaps the most elaborate noble entertainment unfolds not in forests or tournament grounds, but in the great halls of castles where feasting becomes theater and meals transform into elaborate displays of wealth and power. Picture yourself in a hall lit by hundreds of candles, their light dancing off tapestries that cost more than entire villages see in a year. The feast begins not with simple serving of food, but with ceremony that can last for hours. Musicians play from galleries overhead, their melodies carefully chosen to complement each course. Servants move in choreographed patterns, their livery color coordinated, their movements rehearsed until they achieve ballet-like precision. Watch as the first course arrives, not the simple bread and ale of the tavern, but elaborate constructions that blur the line between food and art. Roasted peacocks presented with their feathers intact, their beaks gilded with actual gold. Massive pies that, when cut open, release live birds that flutter around the hall to the delight and surprise of the guests. Between courses, entertainment flows seamlessly. Jugglers perform with objects far more valuable than the knives used by their common counterparts. Silver plates, crystal goblets, items whose destruction would represent a minor fortune. Acrobats wear silk instead of rough wool, their performances enhanced by the soft glow of candlelight on expensive fabric. The conversations here follow different patterns than those in village taverns. Politics and poetry mingle with gossip about distant courts. Languages switch between Latin French and local dialects depending on the subject matter and who might be listening. Even casual chatter carries weight. A carelessly spoken word might influence trade agreements or marriage negotiations. As the evening progresses and wine flows more freely, the entertainment becomes more intimate, more personal. A lord might challenge a visiting knight to an impromptu contest of wit or wordplay. Ladies engage in subtle competitions of fashion and cleverness. Musicians take requests for songs that tell stories of courtly love and distant adventures. These noble entertainments serve purposes beyond simple pleasure. They're displays of power, demonstrations of wealth, networking opportunities disguised as social gatherings. Every hunt, every joust, every feast reinforces the social order that keeps these privileged few in their elevated positions. Yet for all their elaborate staging and expensive trappings, there's something similar to the village entertainments in their underlying purpose. Whether it's peasants wrestling in the mud or nobles jousting in gleaming armor, humans seek the same basic satisfactions: competition, community, the temporary escape from daily routine, the chance to prove themselves worthy of respect and admiration. As dawn breaks and the noble entertainment finally winds down, servants begin the long process of cleaning up. But the effects linger, stories that will be told and retold, alliances formed, and tested displays of power that reinforce the divine right of those born to rule over those born to serve. But what of the women in this medieval world? Their joy existed in different spaces, took different forms, and often carried meanings that the men around them never suspected. Step quietly now, away from the public squares and tournament grounds, toward the more private spaces where women gathered when the day's work was finally done. Not the tavern that remained largely a masculine domain, but kitchens after the evening meal chambers, where firelight created intimate circles, gardens where conversation could flow without male oversight. Picture a solar, the private chamber of a noble household where women spent their daylight hours. The light filters through small windows, casting geometric patterns on wooden floors, worn smooth by generations of soft-soled shoes. Here, entertainment takes on a different quality, entirely quieter, more subtle, but no less sophisticated than the loud competitions happening elsewhere. Watch as a group of women gather around a large embroidery frame, their work creating not just functional items, but elaborate artworks that will outlast their creators. But don't mistake this for mere domestic labor. Listen to their conversation as their needles move with practiced precision. Hear in the rhythm of stitching stories unfold that would never be told in mixed company. The embroidery itself becomes a form of communication, a way to record events and express opinions that couldn't be spoken aloud. A subtle change in color might indicate disapproval of a marriage arrangement. The way a figure is positioned in the design could comment on political events. These women are creating not just decoration, but historical records written in silk and gold thread. Between stitches, games emerge that test memory and wit. One woman begins a story speaking only a few sentences before passing it to her neighbor, who must continue the tale without breaking its logic or rhythm. Watch how the story evolves as it moves around the circle, sometimes becoming comedy, sometimes romance, sometimes thinly veiled commentary on their own lives and the restrictions placed upon them. Their laughter has a different quality than what you heard in the village square or tavern. It's more controlled, more musical, but no less genuine. These women have learned to find joy within strict boundaries, to create entertainment that appears proper while actually being quite subversive. Move now to a humbler setting, a cottage where several women have gathered after their families have gone to sleep. The fire burns low, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with herbs hanging to dry. Here, entertainment takes on an even more intimate character. Away from male supervision, their conversations grow bolder, their games more daring. Watch as they play a game that has no formal name, involving the rolling of small carved bones, not dice exactly, but markers that determine which player must answer increasingly personal questions. As the evening progresses and the questions grow more revealing, you understand that this is more than entertainment. It's therapy, confession, and rebellion, all wrapped into one. The questions start innocently enough. What was your first impression of your husband? But gradually become more pointed. If you could change one thing about your life, what would it be? What do you dream about when you're alone? The bones give them permission to speak truths that would be dangerous in any other context. Sometimes, the evening's entertainment involves fortune telling, though they would never use that term if asked. Instead, they speak of reading signs or understanding patterns. Watch as an older woman arranges colored stones in complex patterns, their placement supposedly revealing information about the future. Whether anyone truly believes in the predictions matters less than the sense of agency. It provides the feeling that they have some control over their destinies. In the merchant class households, women gather for different but equally meaningful entertainments. Here, literacy is more common, and evening gatherings might center around the reading of romance tales, stories of courtly love and adventure that transport them far from their daily realities of managing households and bearing children. Listen as one woman reads aloud from a manuscript carefully copied by hand, her voice bringing life to tales of brave knights and clever ladies who use their wits to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The other women listen with the intensity of scholars studying sacred texts, occasionally interrupting to debate the motivation of characters or the wisdom of their choices. These stories serve as more than entertainment. They're instruction manuals for navigating a world that gives women few options for direct action. The heroines who triumph through cleverness rather than strength provide models for how to achieve their goals within the constraints of medieval society. But perhaps the most subversive entertainment occurs during the spinning and weaving gatherings that happen in every household. The rhythmic motion of the spindle or the back and forth of the shuttle creates a hypnotic backdrop for conversations that range far beyond domestic concerns. Here, news travels faster than any official messenger service. Information about political changes, economic shifts, and social scandals spreads from woman to woman, household to household, village to village. What appears to be simple gossip is actually an informal intelligence network that keeps women informed about events that will affect their lives. The spinning songs they sing while working contain layers of meaning that would be lost on casual listeners. Some preserve historical events from a woman's perspective. Others encode practical information recipes for remedies advice for difficult situations, warnings about dangerous men or unsafe places. As the evening grows late and the entertainment winds down, there's a sense of fellowship that transcends social class. Whether they're noble ladies with their silk embroidery or peasant women with their rough wool, they've shared something precious, time away from the demands of others, space to be themselves, moments of joy carved out of lives that offer few opportunities for personal expression. These gatherings end quietly with careful attention to keeping their activities from drawing unwanted attention. Tomorrow, they'll return to their prescribed roles, dutiful wives, obedient daughters, silent participants in a world designed by and for men. But tonight, they've created their own small corner of freedom, their own forms of rebellion, their own definitions of joy. The fire burns down to embers, casting a warm glow on faces relaxed by friendship and shared secrets. In the morning, this room will return to its daytime function. But the memory of tonight's fellowship will sustain them through the challenges ahead, a reminder that even in the most restricted circumstances, human connection and quiet rebellion can flourish. There comes a moment in every celebration when something magical happens, when individual voices merge into harmony, when separate bodies begin to move as one, when the boundary between performer and audience dissolves entirely. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a village square as evening settles like a gentle blanket over the day's festivities. The formal entertainment has ended. The jugglers have packed away their props. The storytellers have finished their tales. But something new is beginning. Something more organic, more essential to the human spirit. It starts with a single voice, perhaps, that of an old woman whose weathered hands have spent the day kneading bread and tending fires. She begins to hum, almost unconsciously, a melody that seems to rise from the earth itself. The tune is older than memory, passed down through generations like a family heirloom, each singer adding their own small variations while keeping its essential heart intact. Listen as other voices gradually join hers, creating harmonies that no formal choir could achieve. These aren't trained singers following written music. They're people who've learned to blend their voices through years of working together, singing while they harvest grain or wash clothes by the river. Their harmony comes not from practice, but from understanding, from knowing how their voice fits with their neighbors like pieces of a well-worn puzzle. Watch as the music begins to affect the crowd physically. Feet start to tap against the packed earth, at first unconsciously, then with growing intention. Hands begin to clap in rhythm, creating a percussion section that needs no instruments. Bodies that have spent the day bent over work gradually straighten. Shoulders that carried burdens begin to sway with the melody. A young man steps forward into the center of the forming circle, his movement tentative at first. He's not a trained dancer. His days are spent behind a plow or at a workbench. But the music calls to something deeper than training, something that speaks to the rhythm of his heartbeat, the cadence of his breathing. His feet find patterns that seem to emerge naturally from the melody, simple steps that anyone can follow. Soon, others join him, their movements creating a living mandala of human bodies in motion. This isn't the formal court dancing of the nobility, with its elaborate rules and rigid positioning. This is folk dance in its purest form, movement that celebrates the joy of being alive, of being part of a community, of having survived another day in a world that offers no guarantees. The dance evolves organically, following traditions that have no written rules but are understood in the bones. Partners change with the music's flow. Grandparents dancing with grandchildren. Young lovers stealing moments of closeness under the protective eye of the community. There's no judgment here, no criticism of technique, only the shared celebration of movement and music. Notice how the instruments gradually appear, emerging from the crowd as if by magic. A shepherd produces a simple wooden flute, its sound thin but pure, adding melodic decoration to the vocal foundation. Someone else contributes a small hand drum, its rhythm punctuating the clapping hands with deeper tones that seem to echo the heartbeat of the earth itself. A blacksmith, his massive hands surprisingly gentle, holds a small lyre, perhaps something he crafted himself during the long winter evenings when outdoor work was impossible. His fingers pick out accompaniment patterns that weave between the melody and rhythm, creating musical textures that transform the simple folk song into something approaching the sublime. As the dancing continues and more people join the circle, you begin to see the social magic that music creates. Disputes that simmered during the days, work seemed to dissolve in the shared rhythm. The farmer who accused his neighbor of letting cattle wander into his grain field finds himself dancing beside the accused, their conflict forgotten in the moment of shared celebration. Children dart in and out of the dancing circle, their small bodies moving with the unconscious grace that adults spend lifetimes trying to recapture. They haven't learned yet that dancing requires skill, or that music demands training. For them, rhythm and movement are as natural as breathing, as essential as eating. Watch an elderly couple as they dance together, their movements economical but profoundly elegant. These bodies have danced together for decades through good harvests and bad, through the births of children and the deaths of parents. Their dance is a conversation conducted entirely through movement, a dialogue of love and memory and shared experience. The music itself begins to take on a life of its own, evolving as the evening progresses. New verses appear spontaneously, often commenting humorously on the day's events or gently teasing someone in the crowd. A particularly graceful dancer might inspire a verse praising their skill. A clumsy moment might generate gentle laughter, and a verse that turns embarrassment into entertainment. This is oral tradition in action culture being created and preserved simultaneously. Tonight's verses might become part of the permanent song, or they might disappear with dawn, their purpose fulfilled in the moment of their creation. Either way, they serve their function of binding the community together through shared laughter and recognition. As the night deepens and the dancing continues, something approaching the mystical begins to emerge. The boundary between individual and community starts to blur. Dancers move in patterns that seem choreographed by some invisible hand, their movements coordinated not through planning, but through intuitive understanding of the music's demands. The fire at the center of the square casts dancing shadows that mirror the human dancers, creating the illusion that the celebration extends beyond the physical participants to include the very elements themselves. Sparks rise toward stars that seem to pulse in rhythm with the earthbound music. This is why music and dance have been central to human celebration since before recorded history. They speak to something fundamental in the human spirit, the need to move together to create beauty collectively to transform individual joy into something larger and more lasting than any single person could achieve alone. Eventually, as all things must, the dancing begins to wind down. Voices grow softer, movements slower, the frenetic energy of celebration gradually giving way to the gentle fatigue of bodies well used. But the music doesn't simply stop. It fades like sunlight at day's end, leaving behind the warm glow of shared experience. But beneath the laughter and dancing beneath the games and feasting medieval celebration spoke in a language older than words, a language of symbols and rituals that carried meanings too important to trust to mere speech. Follow the flickering torchlight toward where a group has gathered around an ancient oak tree, its massive trunk scarred by centuries of weather and marked by generations of human hands. Tonight, this tree has been transformed into something more than wood and bark. It has become a living symbol, draped with ribbons and garlands that flutter in the evening breeze, like prayers made visible. Watch as people approach the tree with offerings not gold or silver, but simple tokens that carry profound meaning. A young bride ties a strip of cloth from her wedding dress to a low branch, her whispered prayer for fertility and happiness, joining the countless others that have been offered here. A farmer attaches a braid of grain stalks, asking for next year's harvest to be as abundant as this year's celebration. These aren't superstitious gestures, though they might appear so to modern eyes. They're part of a complex system of meaning that binds community members together through shared symbols and understood rituals. The tree becomes a repository of collective hopes and fears, a physical manifestation of the community's spiritual and emotional life. Notice the careful attention paid to timing and order in even the simplest celebrations. The first dance doesn't begin until the eldest woman in the village gives her nod of approval. The evening meal can't commence until certain words have been spoken, certain gestures completed. These aren't arbitrary traditions, but carefully preserved rituals that connect the present moment to an unbroken chain of past celebrations. Move closer to where children are being taught the proper way to weave flowers into crowns and garlands. This isn't simply craft instruction, it's cultural transmission, the passing down of symbolic knowledge from one generation to the next. Each flower carries its own meaning. Roses for love, lavender for devotion, ivy for fidelity. The way they're arranged, the colors that are combined, all speak in a visual language that every community member can read. The clothing people wear for celebrations tells its own story. That farmer who spent all day in rough homespun has changed into his one good tunic. The one with embroidered borders that his wife worked on during long winter evenings. The patterns aren't merely decorative. They identify his family line, his trade, his place in the community's social structure. To those who know how to read them, his clothes are as informative as a written biography. Listen to the songs being sung around the fire, and you'll notice they follow patterns as ancient as the melodies themselves. Certain verses must be sung in order certain responses given at prescribed moments. This isn't rigidity for its own sake, but the preservation of cultural memory through musical ritual. These songs carry the community's history, its values, its understanding of how the world works. Watch the way sacred and secular elements blend seamlessly in medieval celebration. The same hands that tied ribbons to the oak tree earlier will cross themselves before the evening meal. The songs that praised earthly love will be followed by hymns that celebrate divine grace. For medieval people, there was no sharp division between the spiritual and the everyday. Both were part of a unified understanding of existence. The very structure of the celebration follows ritualistic patterns that reinforce social bonds. Notice how the evening progresses through distinct phases: gathering, sharing food, entertainment, dancing, and finally, the quiet conversations that mark the celebration's end. Each phase has its purpose, its traditions, its symbolic meaning. Together, they create a complete experience that addresses every aspect of human need: physical, social, emotional, and spiritual. Pay attention to the role of reversal and transformation in the celebration. The servant who today gives orders as Lord of Misrule. The elderly man who dances with the grace of youth. The shy maiden who sings boldly before the crowd. These aren't accidents, but carefully orchestrated opportunities for people to explore different aspects of themselves within the safety of ritual space. These moments of reversal serve as pressure valves for a rigidly hierarchical society, but they also demonstrate deeper truths about human nature and social organization. By temporarily inverting normal roles, the celebration reminds everyone that social positions are constructs, not natural laws. The Lord needs his servants. The young need the wisdom of age. The strong need the gentleness of the weak. The symbols used in celebration often carry multiple layers of meaning simultaneously. That wheel of cheese shared among the community represents not just nourishment, but abundance, generosity, and the circular nature of time and season. The fire at the center of the gathering provides light and warmth, yes, but also serves as a symbol of purification, transformation, and the divine spark that animates all life. As you observe these rituals unfolding, notice how they create a sense of sacred time that exists apart from the ordinary flow of days. During celebration, normal rules are suspended. Impossible things become possible, and the community exists in a state of heightened awareness and connection. This isn't escape from reality, but engagement with a deeper level of reality that everyday life often obscures. The physical actions of celebration, the dancing, singing, feasting, and game playing are vessels for meanings that transcend their surface appearances. When people dance together, they're not just moving their bodies, but creating visual metaphors for community harmony. When they share food, they're not just satisfying hunger, but participating in ancient rituals of communion and mutual obligation. Even the simplest gestures carry symbolic weight. The way ale is poured and shared, the direction of movement in circle dances, the order in which people speak or perform, all of these follow patterns established by tradition and invested with meaning by collective agreement. To participate fully in medieval celebration requires not just physical presence, but cultural literacy, the ability to read and respond to this rich symbolic language. As the celebration continues and the symbolic actions accumulate, something transformative happens. Individual participants become part of something larger than themselves, temporary actors in an eternal drama that connects them to their ancestors and descendants. Through ritual and symbol, the fleeting moment of celebration becomes part of the timeless story of human community. In a world where the church bell marked every hour and holy days outnumbered ordinary ones, joy itself followed a sacred rhythm, sanctioned and structured by the endless cycle of the Christian year. Imagine living in a world where time itself was holy, where every season carried its own spiritual significance and its own prescribed celebrations. The medieval calendar wasn't just a way of marking days. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of observance that gave meaning and structure to the entire year. And within this sacred framework, joy found its proper place, blessed and encouraged rather than merely tolerated. Picture the approach of Christmas in a medieval village, not the single day of modern celebration, but a season that stretched from Advent through Epiphany. Weeks of building anticipation punctuated by feast days that each carried their own traditions and entertainments. The very air seems to grow more expectant as December deepens, filled with the scent of special foods being prepared and the sound of carols being practiced. Watch as the community prepares for the Christmas festivities with the same attention they might give to preparing for war. Houses are cleaned and decorated not just for beauty, but as acts of devotion. Special ales are brewed, their recipes passed down through generations and adjusted with the solemnity of priests preparing communion wine. These aren't merely practical preparations, but spiritual exercises that transform mundane tasks into acts of worship. The 12 days of Christmas unfold like chapters in a sacred story, each day bringing its own prescribed celebrations. St. Stephen's Day, with its tradition of charitable giving to servants and the poor. The Feast of Fools, where social order turns delightfully upside down. Epiphany, when the gift giving reaches its climax and children receive their presents with the understanding that they mirror the gifts given to the Christ child. During these holy seasons, entertainment that might be questionable at other times becomes not just acceptable, but encouraged. The church itself sponsors dramatic performances that tell biblical stories with all the pageantry that medieval imagination can devise. Mystery plays transform church steps into stages where angels and devils battle for souls, where biblical heroes speak in the local dialect, where sacred stories become as immediate and real as the day's gossip. Move forward through the year to Easter and witness how the rhythm of celebration follows the church's liturgical calendar with mathematical precision. The long abstinence of Lent creates a hunger not just for food, but for joy itself. When Easter finally arrives, the release is explosive pent-up energy channeled into celebrations that can last for weeks. Listen to the Easter songs, many of them far older than Christianity itself, ancient spring melodies that have been adapted to celebrate resurrection and renewal. The same tunes that once honored pagan deities now praise the risen Christ, but the fundamental human joy they express remains unchanged. These songs carry the accumulated celebration of countless generations, their melodies worn smooth by time and repetition. The tradition of Easter eggs transforms into elaborate games and contests that blend sacred symbolism with pure entertainment. Egg-rolling competitions become metaphors for Christ's emergence from the tomb. Egg hunts echo the disciples' search for their risen master. What begins as religious observance becomes community celebration so naturally that no one notices the transition. Follow the calendar to Pentecost and observe how the Church's celebration of the Holy Spirit's descent becomes excuse for festivities that celebrate human community and divine grace simultaneously. Whitsundalis flow as freely as prayers, and both are understood to honor the same divine source. The boundary between sacred and secular celebration dissolves completely, not through irreverence, but through the medieval understanding that all joy ultimately springs from the same holy well. Notice how the church calendar creates natural rhythms of anticipation and release throughout the year. The solemn preparation of Advent makes Christmas celebration more intense. The fasting of Lent amplifies the joy of Easter. The ordinary time between major feasts creates space for appreciation of daily blessings while building anticipation for the next great celebration. Saints' days provide additional opportunities for celebration, each one bringing its own traditions and entertainments. St. John's Eve with its bonfires and midnight revelries. St. Michael's Day, marking harvest time with feasts that celebrate both divine provision and human labor. These aren't just religious observances, but community celebrations that use sacred occasions to strengthen social bonds. The Church's blessing transforms potentially dangerous or morally questionable activities into sanctified entertainment. Morris, dancing with its roots in ancient fertility rituals, becomes acceptable when performed on appropriate feast days. Dramatic performances that might smack of paganism are welcomed when they tell Christian stories. Even gambling can be overlooked when it occurs during sanctioned celebration periods. Watch how the church calendar creates a shared temporal framework that unites the entire community regardless of social class. Rich and poor alike observe the same feast days, participate in the same seasonal rhythms, anticipate the same celebrations. The lord in his castle and the peasant in his cottage mark time by the same sacred calendar, creating bonds that transcend economic and social divisions. The cyclical nature of the church year provides comfort and structure in a world where so much remains uncertain. No matter what disasters or difficulties might arise, Christmas will still come in winter, Easter in spring, harvest festivals in autumn. These celebrations provide anchor points of stability in lives that often feel precarious and unpredictable. As you follow this sacred rhythm through an entire year, notice how it shapes not just when people celebrate, but how they understand celebration itself. Joy becomes not a guilty pleasure to be hidden, but a religious duty to be fulfilled. Laughter becomes a form of prayer, dancing, a type of worship, feasting, a way of honoring divine generosity. The church calendar doesn't restrict medieval joy, but channels it, giving it proper timing and appropriate forms. Like a riverbank that doesn't stop the water's flow, but directs it toward useful purposes. The liturgical year ensures that celebration serves both human needs and divine glory. When evening falls on any feast day in the medieval calendar, participants go to their rest with the satisfaction of having honored both God and community, of having celebrated in ways that their ancestors would recognize and their descendants will continue. They participated in something larger than individual pleasure. They've taken part in the eternal rhythm of sacred time. Beyond the sacred calendar, beyond the church's careful ordering of time, lays something even more ancient, the rhythm of the earth itself, marking seasons with celebrations that reached back to humanity's deepest memories. Picture the medieval year as a great wheel turning slowly through cycles of light and darkness, warmth and cold, planting and harvest. Each spoke of this wheel brought its own joys, its own traditions, its own reasons for celebration. These weren't just arbitrary markers of time, but acknowledgments of humanity's fundamental dependence on forces beyond their control. Feel the approach of winter solstice, when darkness reached its deepest point and light began its slow return. This wasn't merely an astronomical event, but a moment of profound psychological and spiritual significance. Communities gathered not just for warmth, but for reassurance. The ancient promise that no matter how dark the world became, light would always return. The Yule log, carefully selected and ceremoniously ignited, represented more than fuel for winter fires. Its slow burning through the longest night symbolized endurance, hope, and the promise of spring's eventual return. Watch families as they tend this sacred flame, their faces lit by firelight that connects them to countless generations who've performed this same ritual during winter's darkest hours. Spring's arrival brought explosions of celebration that had little to do with church doctrine and everything to do with pure relief at winter's end. May Day festivities with their May poles and flower crowns, their dawn dancing, and elaborate games celebrated fertility and renewal in ways that made church authorities perpetually nervous, but never quite successful in their attempts at suppression. Listen to the laughter of young people as they gather flowers in pre-dawn darkness, their joy infectious as spreading warmth. The May Queen, crowned with blossoms and surrounded by her court of flower bearers, represents not just beauty, but the earth's renewed power to sustain life. These celebrations speak to something deeper than religious doctrine. They honor the miracle of life itself. Summer solstice brought its own traditions, festivals of light and abundance that celebrated the year's peak. Bonfires blazed not for warmth, but for joy, their flames reaching toward the sun at its highest point. Communities gathered to watch the sunrise, to dance until dawn, to revel in the year's moment of maximum light and warmth. Harvest celebrations marked autumn's arrival, with festivals that mixed gratitude and anxiety in equal measure. The joy of successful harvest was always tempered by awareness of winter's approach. Watch harvest dancers as they move through fields cleared of grain, their steps both celebration of abundance and prayer for survival through the dark months ahead. These seasonal celebrations created a rhythm deeper than weekly or monthly cycles, connecting medieval communities to the fundamental patterns that governed their survival. They weren't separate from daily life, but emerged naturally from it, acknowledgments of humanity's place within larger cycles of growth and rest, abundance and scarcity. As you follow this great wheel through its annual turning, notice how each season's celebrations prepare the community for what's coming next. Winter's fires build strength for spring's labor. Spring's fertility festivals prepare for summer's growth. Summer's abundance creates stores for autumn's harvest. Autumn's gratitude provides spiritual sustenance for winter's darkness. This is celebration as survival mechanism, joy as communal necessity. Entertainment as sacred acknowledgement of humanity's place within the great rhythms that govern all life. But not every story of medieval entertainment ends with laughter and warm fellowship. Sometimes, in the heat of competition or the haze of ale joy transformed into something darker, more dangerous. Picture that same village square where we witnessed so much celebration. But now, imagine it under different circumstances. The morning sun reveals scattered debris from the previous nights, festivities, overturned benches, torn banners, dark stains on the stones that might be ale, or might be something else entirely. The air still carries the acrid scent of smoke, but not the comfortable smoke of hearth fires. This is the sharper smell of things that shouldn't have burned. Step carefully now through the aftermath of a celebration that went wrong. That football match between neighboring villages, which began with such good-natured rivalry, escalated beyond the bounds of sport. What started as a game became a battle, with fists replacing the pig's bladder ball as the focus of action. The line between athletic competition and actual warfare proved thinner than anyone anticipated. Listen to the whispered conversations in doorways as villagers recount what they witnessed. Voices grow quiet when they describe the moment the contest transformed from entertainment into violence. Perhaps it was a disputed goal or an overly aggressive tackle that crossed the line from sport to assault. Maybe it was simply the accumulation of old grievances that found outlet in the chaos of the game. Watch the blacksmith as he examines his bruised knuckles, his face a mixture of shame and defiance. Yesterday he was wrestling for sport and community bonding. But when his opponent, his neighbor, someone he'd worked alongside for years, made a comment about the quality of his ironwork, the friendly contest became personal. What ended it wasn't a clean victory, but the sickening sound of bone breaking and the sudden realization that they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The wrestling matches that brought such joy and community pride carried inherent dangers that participants accepted as part of the experience. Without proper medical knowledge or quick treatment for injuries, a broken bone might mean permanent disability. A blow to the head could result in lasting damage that would affect a person's ability to work and support their family for the rest of their life. Move closer to where a group of women tend to a young man whose face bears the purple evidence of last night's entertainment gone wrong. The hammer-throwing contest seems safe enough, just a test of strength and accuracy. But when one competitor accused another of cheating, when claims of foul play escalated into challenges of honor, the heavy hammers became weapons rather than sporting equipment. Notice how quickly the community's mood shifted from celebration to something approaching fear. The same crowd that cheered enthusiastically for athletic prowess fell silent when skill transformed into savagery. The boundary between acceptable competition and dangerous violence was clear to everyone, but proved remarkably easy to cross in the heat of the moment. The bear baiting that drew such enthusiastic crowds carried dangers that extended beyond the obvious risks to the participating animals. When the crowd's bloodlust was aroused, when ale loosened inhibitions and violence became entertainment, spectators sometimes turned on each other with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for the staged combat. Disagreements about the outcome, disputes over wagered coins, accusations of cheating, all could escalate rapidly in an atmosphere already charged with aggressive energy. Follow the trail of evidence from a cockfighting match that ended in disaster. The stakes had been higher than usual. Not just coins, but family reputations, old debts, and newer grievances. When one prized rooster fell too quickly, when accusations of drugging or deliberate weakening began to fly, the crowd took sides with the intensity of warring armies. The small circle that had contained the fighting birds expanded to encompass much of the village square. But perhaps most dangerous of all were the drinking contests that seemed like harmless tests of capacity. Watch an older woman as she tends to her son who lies unconscious from consuming far more ale than his body could process. What began as good-natured competition to see who could drink the most became a potentially fatal test of endurance. The line between impressive consumption and dangerous poisoning was crossed without anyone noticing until it was too late. The very anonymity that made some entertainments possible also made them dangerous. During the Feast of Fools, when normal social order was suspended and people wore masks or disguises, the usual restraints on behavior disappeared. Someone who would never dream of insulting a neighbor face to face might feel free to do so while hidden behind a costume. The freedom to rebel against authority could quickly become license for personal vendettas. Notice how mob mentality transformed individual participants into something they wouldn't recognize in daylight. The mild-mannered baker who spent his days serving customers with patient courtesy became a howling participant in mob violence when the crowd's energy overtook his individual judgment. The gentle miller's wife, known throughout the village for her kindness to children and animals, found herself screaming for blood when caught up in the collective madness of group violence. The gambling that added excitement to dice games and sporting contests carried risks that extended far beyond the immediate stakes. When a farmer wagered his family's seed grain on a wrestling match, when a craftsman bet his tools on the outcome of a cockfight, the entertainment stopped being fun and became survival. The excitement of potential winnings blinded participants to the catastrophic consequences of loss. As you survey the damage left by entertainment turned dangerous, notice how quickly the community works to restore normal relationships. The same neighbors who were enemies last night must return to working together today. Fields need tending, animals require care, and daily survival depends on cooperation, regardless of the previous evening's conflicts. But some damage can't be easily repaired. That broken friendship between wrestling partners, that family bankrupted by gambling losses, that young man whose injuries will affect his ability to work. These consequences will linger long after the immediate excitement fades. Entertainment that began as escape from life's hardships sometimes created new hardships that were far worse than the originals. There's something about crowds that transforms ordinary people into something else entirely. Something that can turn a gathering for entertainment into an instrument of swift, terrible justice. Picture a market day that began like any other, with vendors setting up their stalls and townspeople going about their morning business. The atmosphere is light, almost festive, as people look forward to the afternoon's planned entertainment, perhaps a traveling performer or a scheduled wrestling match. But then word spreads through the crowd like fire through dry wheat. Someone has been caught stealing. Watch how quickly the mood shifts, how individual faces change as the news passes from person to person. The baker who was laughing with customers a moment ago now wears an expression of grim determination. The miller's wife, who had been playfully bargaining over the price of grain, suddenly straightens with righteous anger. The transformation isn't gradual. It happens in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Listen to the change in the crowd's voice. What began as scattered conversations becomes a unified murmur, dozens of individual voices merging into something larger and more powerful than any single speaker. The sound grows not louder exactly, but denser, more focused, like a storm gathering strength. Individual words become lost in the collective rumble, but the intent is unmistakable. Follow the crowd as it moves with purpose that seems both organized and spontaneous. No one appears to be leading yet. Everyone moves in the same direction, with the coordination of a flock of birds changing course. The accused thief, perhaps a stranger passing through town, or maybe someone from a neighboring village, finds himself surrounded not by individuals, but by a single, many-headed entity whose intentions are becoming terrifyingly clear. Notice how normal social boundaries dissolve in the crowd's collective consciousness. The usually deferential peasant woman finds herself shouting accusations alongside the wealthy merchant. The timid apprentice, who normally keeps his thoughts to himself, adds his voice to calls for punishment with surprising boldness. In the crowd, individual personality disappears, replaced by collective will. The entertainment that was supposed to happen this afternoon has been forgotten, replaced by a different kind of spectacle entirely. This isn't planned performance, but spontaneous theater, and everyone present becomes both actor and audience. The distinction between participant and observer vanishes as the crowd's energy pulls everyone into its orbit. Watch the faces around you and notice how they reflect something that isn't quite individual emotion. There's a strange uniformity in their expressions, not the uniformity of conscious coordination, but something deeper, more primitive. These people aren't thinking as individuals anymore. They're feeling as a collective organism responding to perceived threat. The accused thief's protests of innocence, his attempts to explain himself, are lost in the crowd's roar. Truth and falsehood become irrelevant when weighed against the crowd's certainty. Evidence that might be carefully considered in a formal court setting is swept aside by the overwhelming conviction of many voices speaking as one. This is necessarily malicious intent on anyone's part. Individually, most of these people are fair-minded, reasonable, capable of mercy and careful judgment. But something about being part of the crowd changes their capacity for rational thought. The collective consciousness operates by different rules, responds to different impulses than individual minds. Listen as someone in the crowd shouts a suggestion for punishment, perhaps the stocks or a public whipping. The idea spreads through the gathered people like a song being picked up by new voices. Soon, the entire crowd is chanting the same words, the same demand for retribution. The suggestion has become group will individual voice, has become collective command. Notice how the crowd's sense of justice differs from formal legal procedures. There's no patience for lengthy deliberation, no tolerance for procedural delays. The crime has been witnessed, the culprit identified, and justice must be immediate and visible. The crowd's justice is swift, certain, and utterly convinced of its own righteousness. Watch as implements for punishment appear seemingly from nowhere. Someone produces rope, another brings forward a bucket of kitchen scraps suitable for throwing. These aren't premeditated preparations, but spontaneous contributions from individuals who suddenly find themselves participants in collective action. The crowd's needs manifest its tools as if by magic. The entertainment value of mob justice can't be ignored, though it makes modern sensibilities recoil. For people whose daily lives offer few diversions, whose entertainment options are limited by season and circumstance, the drama of crime and punishment provides excitement that rivals any planned performance. The crowd feels energized, unified, purposeful in ways that ordinary life rarely provides. But observe also how quickly the mob's certainty can shift, how easily its target can change. If someone in the crowd dares to question the accused's guilt, if new information suggests a different interpretation of events, the collective anger can turn just as quickly on the questioner. Being part of the mob provides safety only as long as you remain aligned with its will. As the punishment unfolds, perhaps the thief tied to a post, while townspeople throw rotten vegetables, or subjected to some other form of public humiliation. Watch how individual participants begin to separate themselves from the collective action. One by one, people start to remember who they are outside the crowd, to feel uncomfortable with what they've become part of. The aftermath of mob justice carries its own peculiar atmosphere. As the crowd disperses and people return to their individual identities, there's often a strange mixture of satisfaction and unease. The collective certainty that seemed so powerful in the moment begins to feel less solid when examined by individual conscience. Tomorrow, these same people will greet each other as neighbors and friends, most of them avoiding direct reference to the previous day's events. The baker will serve bread to customers with his usual politeness. The miller's wife will return to her gentle manner with children. The mob was real, but it was also temporary. A collective identity that emerged acted and dissolved like morning mist. This is the dark side of community spirit, the shadow cast by the same social bonds that create positive entertainment and mutual support. The same forces that can unite a village in joyful celebration can just as easily unite it in terrible purpose, transforming individual people into instruments of collective will. And so we reach the end of our journey through the entertainment and joy of medieval life. As the last echoes of ancient laughter fade into memory, what lessons do these long-ago celebrations hold for us today? Picture yourself standing once more in that village square where our journey began. But now it's evening, and the day's festivities have ended. The temporary stages have been dismantled. The game area is cleared. The last of the ale barrels rolled away. Only shadows remain, where hours ago there was laughter music and the press of human bodies celebrating together. Look around at the faces of the people heading home. There's fatigue there, yes, but also satisfaction. The deep contentment that comes from having participated in something larger than individual existence. These people have connected with their community, their traditions, their own capacity for joy in ways that will sustain them through the challenges ahead. What strikes you most about medieval entertainment isn't its crudeness or violence, though both were certainly present. Instead, it's the deep integration of celebration into daily life, the understanding that joy wasn't a luxury to be indulged in guilty moments, but a necessity as essential as food and shelter. Medieval people didn't separate entertainment from life, they wove it into the very fabric of existence. Consider how different this is from our modern approach to fun and recreation. We tend to compartmentalize our entertainment setting, aside specific times and places for leisure, while treating most of life as something to be endured rather than celebrated. Medieval people found reasons for celebration embedded in the rhythm of seasons, the cycle of holy days, the completion of daily work. Their entertainment was communal in ways that our individualized modern entertainments rarely achieve. When medieval people celebrated entire communities participated not as consumers watching professionals perform, but as active participants creating joy together. The line between performer and audience was fluid, permeable, often non-existent. Think about the tavern where neighbors gathered not just to drink, but to share stories, settle disputes, and maintain the social bonds that held their community together. Compare this to our modern gathering places where people often sit side by side while staring at individual screens, physically present but mentally isolated from each other. The seasonal celebrations we explored reveal something profound about human relationship with time and nature. Medieval people understood themselves as part of larger cycles, not masters of their environment, but participants in rhythms beyond their control. Their celebrations acknowledge this relationship, finding joy in cooperation with natural forces rather than domination over them. Even the darker aspects of medieval entertainment carry lessons for our time. The mob violence and dangerous competitions remind us that human nature contains potentials for both creation and destruction, that the same social bonds that enable celebration can also enable terrible collective actions. The medieval example suggests that acknowledging these dark potentials openly might be healthier than pretending they don't exist. Medieval people didn't romanticize their entertainment or pretend it was always benign. They understood that real human community includes conflict, competition, and occasional violence. Their celebrations provided channels for these impulses, ways to express and resolve tensions that might otherwise tear communities apart. The integration of sacred and secular in medieval celebration offers another valuable perspective. These people didn't see spiritual and earthly joy as opposing forces, but as complementary aspects of human experience. Their religious festivals celebrated divine grace through human pleasure. Their seasonal celebrations found sacred meaning in natural cycles. This holistic approach to celebration created what we might call sustainable joy happiness that strengthened rather than depleted communities, entertainment that built social bonds rather than isolating individuals, fun that connected people to larger meanings rather than offering only temporary escape. The creativity and adaptability of medieval entertainment also deserves recognition. With limited resources and technology, these communities created rich, varied, meaningful celebrations using nothing but human imagination, skill, and willingness to participate. They turned simple materials, dice, carved from bone balls made from pig bladders, songs passed down through memory, into sources of profound satisfaction. Perhaps most importantly, medieval entertainment was inclusive in ways that modern recreational activities often aren't. Age didn't disqualify participants. Grandparents danced alongside grandchildren. Elderly voices joined in songs. Older hands participated in games. Economic status, while it certainly influenced access to some forms of entertainment, didn't completely exclude anyone from community celebration. As you drift towards sleep tonight, carry with you the image of that medieval community gathering around their fire, sharing stories and songs that connected them to each other and to generations past and future. Their laughter echoes across centuries, reminding us that human joy is both universal and particular, both timeless and rooted in specific moments and places. The legacy of medieval entertainment isn't found in any specific games or customs that we might resurrect, but in the underlying understanding that celebration is essential to human community, that joy shared multiplies rather than diminishes, that entertainment at its best serves purposes far deeper than mere distraction from life's difficulties. In our age of individual screens and privatized pleasures, perhaps we need to rediscover some of that medieval wisdom about the communal nature of joy. Not to return to their world with its real hardships and limitations, but to remember that entertainment can be more than consumption, celebration, more than distraction, joy, more than momentary pleasure. Sleep now, and let your dreams be filled with the echoes of medieval laughter, the memory of communities that knew how to celebrate together, the understanding that joy, like bread, is best when shared. In the morning, carry some of that ancient wisdom into your modern world, and perhaps find new ways to create the kind of sustainable, communal, meaningful celebration that our ancestors understood so well. May your own entertainments bring not just pleasure, but connection, not just distraction, but meaning, not just individual satisfaction, but community joy. This is the true legacy of medieval celebration, the reminder that we are social creatures designed to find our deepest happiness not in isolation, but in the warm, sometimes chaotic, always human experience of celebrating life together.